Doctor, did you observe in State's Exhibit 177A?
So as I mentioned earlier, Tylee was received in multiple bags. This is a photograph of one of the bags. It's sealed with a red body lock. And then on the outside of the bag, you can see handwritten in silver marker, 1 of 3. So this is one of the bags that was received.
What did you observe in 177B?
This is an intact seal of bag 1 of 3.
And again, what's the importance of documenting the seal?
Again, it's evidence preservation. When the bag comes, we want to know that the body lock is intact, and we want to be the ones who open up the body lock.
What did you observe in 177C?
So after we removed the body lock, we opened up the body bag, and there were a number of items within the black body bag. There were 2 additional brown paper bags that you can see here. One is unlabeled and one is labeled with burial site ?
And 177D?
So this is within the same body bag. You can see the 2 paper bags that I just described on the right side. And then on the left side within the body bag are multiple collections of soft tissue, bone, and debris, including dirt and rock.
And is this the area you're speaking of?
Yes.
If you can describe what you observed in 177E?
So after we've gone through all of the remains in those piles that were presented to us on the left side, we cleaned those up and we removed the mud and the dirt and the debris. And what you can see is what is left. What we found was multiple vertebral columns.
Are these those?
Yes. Loops of small bowel that are on the far left of the blue board. And then also small pieces of cartilage and bone that are on the far right of the blue board. And then off to the right, off of the blue board, you can see there's 3 distinct large pieces of bone. So one of those is the right pelvis with attached portion of the right femur. One of them is the left pelvis with attached portion of the left femur. And one of them is the sacrum.
Can you just define for the jury what the sacrum is?
So the sacrum essentially is a bone at the just at the end of your lower back, and that's where the right and the left pelvic bones associate with. So it's part of your pelvis.
Can you tell the jury what you observed in 177F?
So this is essentially bag 1 of 3. It's labeled, you can see. This is everything else that remains. After we sifted through and found the bones, this is all of the dirt and mud and rocks that remained.
In 177G.
So if you remember, within the black body bag, there were two brown body bags. One of them was burial site. So this was what was in that bag to the right. It came in a tinfoil container, and there were multiple small collections of bones and charred bones and other debris.
And what did you observe in 177H?
So the last photograph that you just saw, so this is after sifting through that and cleaning things up, this is what we found. So again, there were two charred vertebral column bones on the far left. There were, and then numerous small charred blackened or white bones that really were unrecognizable. They were too small and they were too much fire artifact to tell what kind of bone they were.
And what did you observe in 177I?
So this is the second black body bag that we received. And you can see on the far left, it's actually labeled 2 of 3 suspected female.
In 177J.
Again, this is a body lock or a sill that's intact. Again, we always take photographs of this to make sure it's intact for evidence preservation.
In 177K.
This is just a better photograph showing the how it was labeled, the 2 of 3 suspected female.
Can you describe what you observed in 177M?
So when we opened up the body bag, this is what we saw. One thing that stands out immediately, at least to us, was there was a green plastic material that's located centrally within the debris and the skeletal remains.
Doctor, not to interrupt you, I'm sorry. Again, without the benefit of a laser pointer, is this where you're referring to the green?
Yes. And when we were able to pull that out and clean it, it was a melted green bucket. And then the rest of what you see is a collection of human remains, including bones, soft tissue. The organs were found in this bag as well.
In 1770, what did you observe there?
So similar to bag 1 of 3, in addition to the human remains that were in the bag, there were 2 additional bags within the body bag. One was a brown paper bag on the far left, and the other was a clear plastic bag that contained a brown paper bag with human remains in it.
Doctor, what did you observe in 177P?
So this is a photograph of the largest portions of the skull that we found in the top. That top piece, that is the frontal bone and portion of the orbits. On the left side is a large piece of skull bone. Obviously, both of them are blackened and charred and crumbly. And then the bottom is a portion of the mandible and maxilla, and you can still make out some teeth. They're partially charred and there's blackened material partially covering them.
Are you aware if any attempts were made during the autopsy to identify these remains through teeth and dental?
Yes. We had a forensic odontologist come to our office on the day of the autopsy to try and identify Tylee via dental comparison of antemortem records that were requested, and the postmortem dental x-rays.
Was that conclusive?
Yes. The forensic odontologist was able to make a positive identification based on dental x-rays.
Detective, can you identify what you saw in 177Q?
So as I stated, within bag 2 of 3, that was the bag where the organs were found that were identifiable. This is a photograph of the heart, which is right in the middle, and then the 2 lungs, which are on the right and left side. It's difficult to identify them. This isn't what heart and lungs typically look like. They're obviously charred. Portions of them are burned away and significantly shrunken as well.
Just for the clarification of the jury, again, without a laser pointer, are these areas the lungs?
Correct.
And this portion is the heart, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall about the size that was when you received it?
They were very small. My best estimate would be they're probably a quarter of the size that they typically are.
And if you can identify what you observed in 177S?
So in all cases, even if the organs are charred and shrunken, and we still examine them. So these are essentially sections that I've taken of the heart and lungs, and they've been laid out.
If you can identify what you observed in 177T?
So as I mentioned earlier, heart and both lungs were found, and we also found 1 kidney. So this is one of the kidneys, and you can see it's blackened and charred, and some of it has been burned away.
If you can explain for the jury what was happening during 177V.
So in bag 2 of 3, if you remember, there was that large collection of human remains. So after we clean them off and clean off the dirt and all the other debris, this is what we found. So in bag number 2, I already stated a lot of the bones that we found, but in bag number 2, we found most of the skull bones. most of the vertebral column, the sternum, portions of ribs. We also found the clavicles, as well as multiple long bones from the upper and lower extremities and some foot bones as well. Now, again, these were not intact, pretty looking bones. They were partially burned away. They were crumbly. They were blackened. But this is what we essentially found after we cleaned everything up.
And if you can describe what you saw on 177X.
Yeah, so this is within bag number 2. This is one of the additional brown paper bags found within the body bag. And you can see there's multiple charred small pieces of bone. Some of them appear to be foot bones, and some of them are unidentifiable.
You can identify when what you observe in 177Z.
So this was bag 3 of 3 that we received in a brown paper bag, and is labeled remains of suspected female.
And 177AA.
So within that large paper bag, there are 5 additional smaller brown paper bags that were sealed and labeled. Each of these smaller brown paper bags contained small fragments of charred bone.
And 177BB.
So again, this is one of the 5 additional brown paper bags that contained multiple fragments of small charred bone.
And are you able to tell, I know it might be a little blurry through the ammo, what that bag is labeled?
It's labeled fire pit -B north. I can't make out the end of that. And then date 06/09/2020.
And just again, what were the contents of that bag?
They were multiple small fragments of charred, crumbly bone.
What did you observe in 177CC?
So this is the 3rd brown paper bag that was received within the larger paper bag. Again, it was sealed with tape and it was labeled. And the contents of this were, again, small fragments of charred, crumbly bone.
And 177DD.
This is the 4th bag that was received within the larger bag. Again, it's taped and labeled, and the contents of this also consisted of multiple small charred, crumbly bone.
And lastly, 177EE.
And this is the 5th bag that was received within the larger brown paper bag, also taped and labeled, and also containing, I believe, soft tissue and charred, crumbly bone.
Doctor, upon completion of your autopsy of Tylee Ryan, what did you do or did your lab do with her remains?
So after we collected and cleaned the bony remains, we sent all of the bones to the FBI for a detailed forensic anthropology report. We had them analyze it and produce a report.
Right. And did you review that report?
I did.
Okay. And did that report take any part in your findings or decision regarding Tylee Ryan's cause of death?
I think every information, I took into account. The report on this came back as they noted, and we noted also before, that there were sharp force markings on the bones, but they really detailed and took photographs of sharp force markings that were found on the sacrum and also on the right and left pelvic bone. So yes, it did play a role in, I did not sign out the case or come to my conclusion until I had all the information back.
Okay. And you did already answer this question yesterday, but because of the time, I would just ask you again, based on your autopsy and your training and education, what was your opinion concerning the cause of death of Tylee Ryan?
I determined the cause of death to be homicide by unspecified means.
Thank you. And just for purposes of clarity, can you remind the jury the criteria for a homicide by unspecified means?
Yes. So as we talked about yesterday, there's guidelines and criteria to go over briefly, just to remind you. One, it has to be objectively suspicious findings. So some of the examples they give is that the body is hidden out of plain view, say in a trunk of a car or in the forest and covered by branches or buried in the ground. Another example is that evidence was attempted or evidence was concealed, right? So they were lit on fire, they were dismembered, bleach was poured on them, something of that nature. So for criteria number one, this case clearly falls into that, fitting both of those criteria. For number two, it's the autopsy doesn't show an obvious cause of death or a better explanation for the cause of death. And the two examples they give there is, one, you have an intact body, you're able to examine it, look at all the organs, and you can't come up with the cause of death. The other example is that there's not enough of the body there for you to determine what the cause of death is. So Tylee would fit under that category. The third criteria is toxicology. That toxicology cannot explain why the decedent is dead. In this case, there was nothing in Tylee's toxicology where I felt I could explain her death. And then the fourth criteria is more based on history and some of the circumstances surrounding the death, the medical records. And we went over Tylee's medical records yesterday, and I didn't think there was a good explanation why otherwise young, healthy teenager would be dead. So those are the guidelines and the criteria I used to come to my conclusion.
My courtesy copies.
Your Honor, we initially had more pictures and then limited what we were going to show to the jury based on what needed to be shown to explain the testimony.
Okay, so this might be tedious for a moment, but in order to keep the record clear, I'd like to go just read in individually those and make sure they track with the state's actual exhibits, so that we do have the record of what was admitted on those. So starting with 176, we've got A, 176B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, X, Y. Then we've got 176 B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, F, G, G, H, H, I, J, J, L, L, and M, M.
In your honor, is that the court's courtesy copy or the exhibit copy?
That's the court's courtesy copy.
Okay. Did the court have 176 AA?
We do have AA. I may have misread that. So AA is also in there.
And it sounded like there was one missing, BB.
BB is there also.
Okay.
On 177. Maybe it'd be easier to just say I had A through EE, and the ones I saw were not included. If you went alphabetically, would be there was no L, R, U, W, or Y. N. Oh. And also no N.
That tracks with the copy I have, your honor. And again, there were some photographs that we deemed unnecessary to put on, but they'd already been marked.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify so that neither the jurors nor somebody looking at the record was wondering where those were. They were not included or admitted. So thanks for addressing that. That will conclude then the direct examination of Dr. Warren. Mr. Pryor, once you're ready, you can go to the podium and conduct cross-examination.
Good morning, Dr. Warren.
Good morning.
As part of your review of the anthropology report, did you note that there were some canine bites of any time on any parts of the remains of Tylee?
I did not notice that on my examination, but I'd probably leave that up to the anthropologist.
Now, you talked previously about bruising and that you do a cut to determine whether or not it was actual bruise or not an actual bruise. But isn't it true there's really no way to determine on any bruise when the bruise occurred, is there?
It's difficult to get exact timing on a bruise. That is true. They've even done studies where they've looked at it under the microscope and try to, really pinpoint the time frame. And it is difficult. Some of the things you can look at are color of the bruise. So typically a fresh bruise is going to be blue, red, purple. As it gets older, it's going to turn brown, green, yellow. And then under the microscope, it usually takes several minutes for inflammation to come in. So if you take a section under the microscope and there's no inflammation, You can presumably say that it was fairly recent before the death. But yes, it is difficult to time bruises and abrasions postmortem.
So if some time had passed, and let's even say that some time had passed, and it was a situation where there was embalming fluid put in the body, and a significant amount of time had passed on bruising, would it be fair to say that at that point there'd be no way to determine what kind of bruising or how to date those bruisings?
Again, as I stated before, it's difficult to get an exact time of a bruise. You can give a time frame. I mean, there's definitely a difference between a fresh bruise and a bruise that's a week old, right? By the look at it under the microscope. In this particular case, on the arms, I took sections of the bruising and looked under the microscope. And what I saw was hemorrhage and no inflammation.
Okay.
So
So
to me, what that means is that it was, probably right around, close to around the time that JJ passed away, because you do need some time for inflammation to come in. But I did not see that on JJ.
okay.
And Dr. Warren, would you maybe just pull that microphone down about 2 or 3 inches downwards? If it's more under your mouth, I think it picks it up better.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Thank you.
But again, in general, when you're talking about bruising, one of the immediate ways to determine the age of a bruise is that if, let's say, a bruise was brown or brownish greenish, that would seem to suggest, at least generally, that that was an older bruise. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
Okay. And even if you dug into that bruise and you saw that there was hemorrhaging, that doesn't necessarily give you the ability to determine when that bruise was placed on the body or occurred. Is that fair?
I think it's fair to say it's difficult to determine the exact time of the bruise. It's more of a range.
Now you spoke about examining Tylee's medical records, and you were able to determine that she was a healthy young girl at the time that this occurred. And she was approximately how tall? Do you recall?
Well, I was unable to get a height at my examination because of the condition of the body.
But in looking at the medical records, were you able to obtain that information?
I don't remember off the top of my head how tall Tylee was.
Okay. Okay. Now, your examination cannot make a determination as to when the remains were put in the ground. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
And even in spite of the anthropologist report and your examination, the fragments that you found in the fire pit, you can't make a determination as to whether or not those were animal or human fragments in the fire pit. Is that right?
I'm not a forensic anthropologist, so
Okay.
I can't. I would not feel comfortable doing that.
Okay.
But that's the whole reason why I sent it to a specialist, a forensic anthropologist.
Okay.
So I think that's a better question for the forensic anthropologist.
And we should rely on a forensic anthropologist to make that determination. Would that be fair?
Yes,
Along with potential DNA evidence?
I think DNA specialists
Okay.
should make determination on DNA.
Do you have a recollection of when the date of these 2 autopsies took place? Specific date?
Yes. So June 11th, 2020.
And the one you said took over a week, so that would have extended on through the 17th or 18th?
That's correct.
There is a term called heavy lungs. Do you recognize that term?
Heavy lungs is sometimes a term used when there's pulmonary edema. So pulmonary edema is when there's an excess amount of fluid in the lungs. You can get pulmonary edema for a wide variety of reasons. For instance, you can get it in congestive heart failure. Your heart isn't pumping as well as it should. Everything kind of backs up, fluid leaks into the lungs. You get heavy lungs, you get pulmonary edema.
And as a matter of record, you can get that pulmonary edema from the heart not operating properly. And for all practical purposes, the heart could look perfectly normal. Isn't that correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. There was no testimony earlier about heavy lungs. This is beyond the scope of Dr. Warren's testimony.
Sustained.
Would you agree with me that the remains that were presented to you were significantly smaller than the remains of Tylee had she been alive at that time?
Again, I think that's probably a better question for the forensic anthropologists.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's safe to say that I can say that we received Tylee and she was dismembered in multiple parts. So obviously, yes, it's going to be shorter than if she was intact, but what that means, or I'm not sure. I think I'd rather leave that question to a forensic anthropologist.
And from your examination, the vital organs were significantly smaller than what they would have been of a normal breathing human being, correct?
That's correct. That's very common in fire-related deaths, and the organs get charred. They shrink, and they lose weight.
Okay. Judge, I don't think I have anything else. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Any redirect from the state?
Just very briefly, Your Honor. Doctor, you were asked about the dating of bruises.
Yes.
Can bruising be considered a form of trauma?
Yes.
And in a situation in which you viewed the remains of J.J. Vallow, would you be surprised to find bruising on that body?
I think any bruising or any injuries in a case like this is very significant.
That's it, Your Honor.